This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Zach Gorchow.
Happy New Year, Zach.
Well, and Happy New Year to you too, Cheyna. Probably the top political story in 2025 in our fair state is the open seat race for Detroit mayor. Mayor Mike Duggan, as we know, has declined to run again. So what better way, we thought, to kick off a new year of MichMash than by diving into the race to see who will lead the city of Detroit from the 11th floor of the Coleman A. Young Municipal Center.
Is it too early to be talking about an election? Honestly, it's never too early these days. The two biggest political jobs in the state are governor and Detroit mayor, and you could make a case the mayor's job is actually more powerful because they can do more unilaterally than a governor. And this could be a crowded race to lead the state's largest city. Detroit City Council President Mary Sheffield announced in December and could be joined by State Rep Joe Tate, former council president Santil Jenkins, council member Fred Durhal III, and many others.
This is looking like the most wide open race for mayor in a quarter century after Dennis Archer decided not to run again in 2001. And it will be a fascinating decision for Detroit voters. Sheffield already has some key supporters in organized labor and even some in the business community, which might have been expected to line up with Tate. But it's also going to be interesting to see whether Tate is damaged or not from a disastrous 2024 for State House Democrats when he was the speaker.
These kinds of races to replace an outgoing executive often are about trying to appeal to what kind of change voters want in a new leader.
That's right. Duggan was able to get basic systems and services working again in the city. Think about streetlights. Downtown is also unrecognizable compared to 15 years ago with the amount of development and revitalization in spots that were previously vacant. But he took some criticism for some rough edges. Yes, abandoned buildings got cleared, but the city's demolition program was frequently criticized as ineffective in an audit and overly aggressive in taking down some buildings with historical value. Duggan's critics, and we should note the mayor would scoff at this, would say economic development was prioritized over neighborhood well-being. But Duggan will leave office a popular mayor, for sure, so it'll be interesting to see how candidates try to both embrace his record but also set themselves apart.
We're going to take a short break, but stick around because M.L. Elrick, who is covering the mayor's race closely for the Detroit Free Press, joins us next. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. I'm Zach Gorchow. Joining us now is one of Michigan's best, most dogged, and dare I say, most feared journalists. M.L. Elrick is a Detroit Free Press columnist whose Sunday column on politics should be a must-click for all our listeners. He's covered Detroit City Hall for the Free and multiple television stations. He has lived most of his life in the city, save for a little time he spent out east. He also hosts the popular M.L. Soul of Detroit podcast. Elrick, welcome to MichMash.
Happy New Year, everybody. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you here. And let's just dive right into what is on a lot of minds when it comes to Detroit, the mayor's race. Yeah. How surprised were you when Duggan announced that he would not be running for mayor again? Had he telegraphed that at all?
I wasn't surprised at all, but I was surprised to see that when he ran for governor, he was going to run as an independent. I'd written a column predicting that Duggan would do well in a race, in a primary, where he could win with less than 50% of the vote because he has experience running a race like that. I had no idea his plan was to win a general election with less than 50% of the vote, which I think may be more likely than if he had competed for the Democratic nomination for governor.
Do you think he could pull this off? Historically, being the mayor of Detroit has not been a tremendous platform to statewide office, save for like Hazen Pingree. Can he do this?
He's a white guy who won his first campaign for mayor as a write-in. So in terms of breaking norms, this guy is, you just don't bet against him. I think the biggest concern that he should have is whether or not some of the folks who have supported him historically for mayor of Detroit will have a favorite candidate for governor, in which case that money he relied on to be elected mayor and to win a write-in campaign will be committed to other candidates. A lot of his support tends to come from corporate types, and they may prefer somebody on the GOP side. So his ability to raise money will be a key factor. But one advantage he has over people running for the nomination in the partisan primaries is he won't have to spend any money on a primary. Every dollar he raises, he can set aside for the general. Now, I don't know if he'll have spending limits that would apply where he can only spend so much in the primary and so much on the general. But if Mike Duggan can raise the money, I think people should watch out because he's a very formidable candidate.
So let's talk about the race itself for mayor. It's still very early days, but who are your top candidates for the mayoral run? So not who you think will win, but just, I mean, who is even going to try? City Council President Mary Sheffield so far is the only one to announce. Who else do you think is going to throw their hat in the ring?
Sure. And I should say I don't have a favorite, but I'll tell you who I think have the greatest chance to win. Mary Sheffield would probably be the front runner at this point, not just because she's already got in the race, but because she has some name recognition and she's known in Detroit. Santil Jenkins, who's a former Detroit City Council president, who is the CEO of Thaw, which is the Heat and Warmth Fund, a nonprofit that helps people keep the utilities going. She's expected to announce her candidacy in January. Fred Durhal, a city councilman, is expected to announce whether he's going to run or not in January. And folks in Lansing know him from his time as a state rep. Joe Tate, the Speaker of the House, has created an exploratory committee, although he's been taking a lot of heavy weather, and he's going to come in trying to get some of the stink at the end of the legislative session off of him. And he's also going to have to establish his name recognition in Detroit because while he's very powerful in Lansing, he was elected from an East Side district and isn't known throughout the city. Those are some of the big candidates. We're led to believe that there may be a pastor who gets in the race. There's a lawyer who is actually has a lot of clients who are in public office, but is probably not known outside of political circles who may get in the race. And perhaps someone from business. There'll be a lot of goofballs who think that if they win the Powerball, they can be elected mayor too. But I would expect that we're going to have 3 or 4 heavyweights who have a legitimate chance at making the runoff. And then it's down to 2. It's a nonpartisan election. So you just have to be a top 2 finisher to have a shot at the big prize.
ML, do you think, is this a time for change election as often is the case when an executive is outgoing from office? Or is Duggan so popular that we're going to see candidates try to cozy up to him and say, hey, status quo, I'm going to keep all these good things going?
Yeah, everybody on city council, in fact, Zach, you and I have covered city council, and I'll tell you, you would not recognize city council these days. This is these guys are what my beloved former colleague Hugh McDermott used to call round-heeled. They get pushed over and roll over for anything. And Mary Sheffield, who cast herself as a populist, which would be a bit different from the profile that Duggan had, has gone out of her way to praise Duggan and just to say, we're going to take the great work that Mike Duggan has done and we're going to build on it. And also talk about we're going to get more in the neighborhoods. I think Duggan would strenuously object to any suggestion that his prosperity didn't extend into the neighborhoods. But this is not going to be enough of Mike Duggan. It's time for change. It's going to be a foundation was laid. I was a partner with Mike Duggan. I helped Mike Duggan do this. And it's going to be really, for the old folks out there, this is going to be George H.W. Bush running to replace Ronald Reagan, except everybody's black and everybody's a Democrat.
So what do you think will be the main areas that voters are going to focus on for the mayor's race? I mean, what should the candidates be bringing to the table to really distinguish themselves?
Sure. I think in Detroit, safety is always a big thing. Our police coming when I call, is EMS functioning properly. City services are a big thing, is trash being picked up. I think things that traditionally might have been issues like parks and recreation centers are not going to be an issue because, frankly, they look fantastic. They look better than they've ever looked. And I think there'll be some discussion about the schools, the quality of education. Even though the mayor of Detroit has no power whatsoever over DPS, it is an issue that affects every Detroiter, and it affects whether families are going to move to Detroit. So I think there will be some discussion of education. But affordability of housing will probably be an issue too. And there'll be the age-old debate over, is the incoming administration more focused on making downtown great or making the neighborhoods great? And of course, we'll hear about taxes. We'll probably hear some talk about reparations. We'll probably hear some talk about whether properties that were over assessed will get some money back from the city. This is an issue that Mary Sheffield made a big deal when she was reelected in 2021 that we haven't heard very much about since. Of course, we'll be asking some questions as the media, but ultimately it's going to be the candidates themselves that are going to be putting issues on the table, and that are going to be calling each other out on whether they think they actually have the solutions and have the plan to carry through what they say they want to do.
Do you think we might see something like what happened after the Daley and Rahm Emanuel regime in Chicago ended, where there was a swing to the left in the mayor's office with Lori Lightfoot first? Is something like that brewing or due in Detroit, where instead of these kind of centrist mayors relative to Detroit in the mold of Mike Duggan, Dave Bing, Kwame Kilpatrick, Dennis Archer, all Democrats, obviously, all left of center, but relative to the, baseline voter in Detroit, more centrist. Do you think we might see a swing to the left or no?
No, I don't think you'll see what people might consider to be a radical or someone who is progressive in sort of a Jill Stein way. We won't have somebody like the guy in New York who said the rent's too damn high. We will have somebody who the business community feels comfortable with, because quite frankly, and I'll tell you this as somebody who ran for Detroit City Council in 2021, the amount of grassroots money that's available in Detroit is very small. A lot of people here are not big campaign contributors. So you're going to see the establishment funding these candidates. And with a crowded field and the cost of running for office citywide, you are going to see people who have convinced the business community, you can trust me to be mayor. Mary Sheffield worked very hard to portray herself as a progressive, the people's candidate. But I'll tell you what, she is going to try and do everything she can to reassure Dan Gilbert and Roger Penske and Jim Nicholson and some of these people who traditionally have funded mayoral campaigns that while she's going to look out for the little guy, the big guy doesn't really have to worry too much about her. And Cindy Paskey, who is the CEO of Strategic Staffing Solutions, a major employer in the city of Detroit, someone who does a lot of business with the city of Detroit, and someone who's put a lot of money into political campaigns in Detroit, has already come out and endorsed Mary Sheffield. And I think Ms. Paskey would be very reluctant to get behind someone that was considered kind of a bomb thrower, someone who was going to flip the table. They want somebody who's going to set the table.
So let's shift gears. Another legislative session is over, and yet again, lawmakers have failed to pass legislation that would expand the state's freedom of information laws. And you've been very critical of this failure in the past. How are you feeling this year?
When you say this year, do you mean 2024? Do you mean, are we looking ahead to 2025? Because
that's a very good point. That being said, I feel like your sigh sums up everything.
Yeah, 2024. I mean, so I'm someone who's critical of lame duck. I think lame duck is a bastardization of the legislative process. This is where things that lawmakers don't have the courage to vote for when they can be held accountable. This is when things that haven't had hearings, that haven't been vetted, that haven't been thoroughly examined, get rammed through. It's a terrible way to work. Yet here we are mourning that nothing happened during lame duck, because there were some matters that did have hearings, that did have broad support, that did get examined from 360 degrees, that died on the table. The expansion of Freedom of Information Act, one that's near and dear to all of us in the media, and should be a very important issue to regular folks, because reporters don't have special rights under the Freedom of Information Act. Everybody does. Republicans voted for it overwhelmingly in the Senate and the House this time. Are they going to bring it back in 2025? Matt Hall said that he would vote for it if it came up. but I haven't heard, and you guys would probably know better than I, whether that's one of his priorities. So, we'll have to see. But there are a lot of things that Governor Whitmer wanted that didn't get passed, and now will only get passed if she can cut a deal with the Republicans. And I think it's safe to say that she will not get as good a deal out of Matt Hall in the House as she would have out of Joe Tate. But then again, maybe it's about time people start compromising. So am I pessimistic based on past practice? Absolutely. Am I optimistic? The fact that I haven't resigned and become a monk somewhere tells you that I have some hope for the future.
ML, you wrote a couple really interesting columns about the governor recently, and it sounded like you had some interesting give and take with the governor's press office about that. How do you assess where the governor is at here as she enters the final 2 years of her governorship?
So she is a lame duck. And there are people who are going to question whether she's giving us 100% because she may have her eyes on a bigger prize. And there are others who are going to wonder whether fatigue has just set in after 6 years in the governor's office. And maybe she's just not going to, want to deal with Republicans. My suspicion is I think that she is going to work with legislators to try and get some road funding stuff done. That is her legacy here. I'll tell you, she doesn't seem to give a damn about FOIA, even though she made some big words about it when she was running as a candidate. But, I wrote about some of the problems with her communications team, but I think every reporter's experienced them. These guys are more worried about how things look. What terms are used to describe the governor? Is calling her excellency disrespectful? In the same way some people feel that calling the mayor of Detroit his honor is disrespectful. Look, folks, these are terms that people use all over the country all the time. I'd be more worried about whether people are talking about my efforts to get legislation passed than nicknames. And frankly, we didn't see a lot of effort to get legislation passed, at least not anything that's been made public. I just think they're worried about the wrong things. I think they need to worry about getting things done for the people and carrying out the rest of her agenda. And whether people call her Big Gretch, or as I've started to call her Big Kvetch, because they're always complaining about something. How about less crying and more trying? Is that cool? Can we do that for the people?
We wanted to end on a happy note with you, which is besides your weekly Free Press column, you are spearheading an exciting project called Eye on Michigan. You're training Michigan State University students on how to execute investigative journalism. Can you tell us about what inspired you to take this concept on?
Sure. And Cheyna, we're doing more than just Michigan State students. All college students are eligible to participate. And we also do an annual Detroit Public High School investigative journalism workshop to try and get kids interested in this profession, in studying it at college. And frankly, to bring diversity to this profession, we really need to have more people from underserved communities investigating their communities and government at large. So we want to start early, get people in the pipeline, and when they get to college, hire them to do the kind of work that we all do, that we all value. And what it's all about is making sure that I'm a little older than you guys, but when we're all gone, that there will be a generation of reporters that know that you have to get off your ass and knock on doors, that you have to go see people, that you have to grab them in the hallway, that you shouldn't be satisfied by sending someone an email and getting their canned responses, that we want to have spontaneous engagements with people, that it's important when you ask somebody a question that you see how they react. And that, quite frankly, the worst way to do interviews is by exchanging emails. We're not looking for pen pals. We're looking for genuine, spontaneous conversations from people who should be well-versed on the issues. And if they're not, will tell us, they'll get back to us. What we've seen far too often is public officials who don't feel that they need to engage with the public, that they don't need to answer questions, that they are apart and above all of us, we're teaching students that you can ask people in power questions, that it's not something they're supposed to do after they get everything done, that it's one of the first things they're supposed to do, is that they shouldn't only talk to us when they want our vote or where they want a contribution, that once they get in office, they can have to continue the conversation with citizens and non-citizens alike about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And students embrace this. They are energized. They feel emancipated. They feel empowered to know that you can go up to one of the most powerful people in the state of Michigan and say, why did you take all those free meals, and expect them to answer. And when they don't answer, they understand, the students and I hope the public officials, that we're going to show people what that looks like. And then we're going to let the people decide whether they're comfortable with where we're at right now in public discourse, because it's become pathetic. We have spokespeople who are paid with taxpayer dollars who won't go on the record. Your job is to speak. It's in your title. We're paying you. Say something. So we want kids to get some of that moral outrage and to know exactly how, when, where, why to do this stuff. And we hope to grow, and we appreciate your support. And we hope people embrace this work and let their lawmakers know that it's important to you too.
That was a great summary. And I can say one of our staff writers here at Gongwer, Lily Gwinney, is an alumna of that program. And you can see it with the way she approaches how she goes about her business. So I think we owe you a thank you there. And the first package that you just referenced focused on lobbyist paid meals for legislators. What was your takeaway from that, Elrick?
That there's a problem. Originally, we set out to just show people who took the most. And as we dug deeper, the publicly available data is not very user-friendly. We had to clean that up. And then we found out, both by looking at the data and by looking at the laws, that there's really no way to tell how many free things lawmakers have taken from lobbyists or from others. And so what was supposed to be a quick project turned into a year-long endeavor. And I think we not only showed people what the problems are, we created a database so that folks can search for any lawmaker who has served since 2001 and see what the lobbyists have reported giving to them. But I think my biggest disappointment is that we haven't seen any legislators or state officials like the Secretary of State say, you know, we're going to do something about this. Now, I'm willing to give the Secretary of State a little breathing room because she just went through a massive election. But this is something, when the media, when the press puts this out there, that there should be lawmakers who say, you know what, I see a problem. My job is here to fix problems and to correct it. No one has picked that up. And I hope that this podcast and other media will help drive home the point that the problem's been identified. The solutions are simple. What we're looking for is a champion. And perhaps somebody running for governor will say, this is an issue I could run on. And perhaps they'll take it to heart a little more than our current governor has done with her pledge to make government more open, because she's completely and utterly failed us there. And we need somebody to take this issue and make it, because they all talk about transparency. Talk is cheap. Unlike the meals they're getting for free, it's time for some action.
ML, thanks so much for joining us on MichMash.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for everything you guys do. If you guys weren't watching in the Capitol, people like me in the hinterlands wouldn't know whose doors to knock on. So it's great to work with you and to be with you today.